Welcome everyone on virtual presence. Please know you are joining the class of WGS Latina Feminist Theory, which honors women of color wisdom. And so today we have a wonderful speaker, Amihan, Matias, and I am Professor Patricia Pedrosa Gonzalez, the professor of this class and Women Gender Studies faculty. I go by the pronouns she, hers, and I am so happy today to welcoming you, and please know my two wonderful students and all the class is in charge as well of this presentation because we co-work inside of the classroom. And so Gabby will introduce her, please say your preferred pronouns, and Emma will introduce her, and both of them we will welcome and give the introduction for our wonderful guest speaker today. Again, thank you so much for being here with us.
My pronouns.
Yes,
So
please.
I'm Gabby and I use she, her pronouns. So dear Amihan, welcome to Keene State. Our program of Women Gender Studies is so glad to have you in our Feminist Theories class. All of us here present in person and virtual, welcome to this session. Before we start, I will say the land proclamation. Keene State is located on the Nadikan, which is a traditional ancestry homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wampanoag people, past and present. Before we start our class, want to say thanks to our great Misty Kennedy for helping with our link connection to make possible our virtual connection. Also, we want to acknowledge this event is sponsored by Women in Gender Studies Award by Fidelity Charity Foundation. Thanks to our representative and donor.
Hi, my name is Emma and I use she, her pronouns. In this course, we recognize and celebrate the ways of knowing, leadership, and power of women of color. We are thankful for the presence of Amihan. Amihan Jennifer Matias is the founder of KAPWA, Racial Equity Transformation. She is a racial equity and organization and leadership development coach, consultant, facilitator, and trainer. She has over 30 years of experience working with social justice and social change organizations, and over 25 years of nonprofit management experience. Amihan has overseen the creation and implementation of several cutting-edge and nationally recognized executive leadership development programs. These include a nonprofit executive coaching program for emerging Black, Indigenous, and people of color leaders of community-based organizations, a nonprofit management training institute, and a 6-month leadership forum for women of color leaders called And We Still Rise. Excuse me. Amihan is a social justice activist, community builder, and leader who has a long history of community activism. She is founder of Massachusetts Asian and Pacific Islanders, MAP, for Health, and the recently formed Asian American Pacific Islanders Alliance of Western Mass. Amihan has served on the board of directors of the Asian American Resource Workshop and the steering committee of the Asian and Pacific Islanders Women's Social Justice Project. She has helped establish the Jasmine Asian Women's Giving Circle in collaboration with the Boston Women's Fund and the Haymarket People's Fund. She also was involved in planning and coordination and welcoming Massachusetts campaign of the Massachusetts Refugee and Immigrant Advocacy Coalition, an immigrant rights initiative to welcome and facilitate positive integration of immigrants and refugees into their Massachusetts communities. Amihan is also a founding board member of the Sojourner Truth School for Social Change Leadership, also served on the board of director of the Sojourner Truth School for Social Change. Amihan has been trained as a coactive coach through Coaching Initiative, Coaches Train Institute, a program accredited by the International Coach Federation. She is also certified as a trained communicator in the state of Massachusetts. Amihan has a degree in social work from Salem State University and is a graduate of Institute for Nonprofit Management and Leadership at the Boston University of Management. Dear Amihan, welcome and thanks again for being here with us.
Thank you for that introduction and the warm welcome. It's so good to be here with you today. And thank you to Professor Patricia for inviting me. So you heard about my background a bit through that introduction, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more about me. So as you know, my name is Amihan Matias and my pronouns are she and siya, and that is a gender neutral Filipino pronoun. I am on the unceded lands of the Nipmuc and Pakamtuk indigenous peoples. I'm a 1.5 generation immigrant from the Philippines, and because it's a collectivist culture, my relationships with others is an important aspect of my identity. So I am a daughter, a spouse, an ate, which is a term for a revered older sister, and a tita, which means aunt. And because I come from a country that was colonized for over 350 years, first by Spain and then the United States, I've had to work hard to uncover and embrace my own indigenous Filipino roots and the rich cultural heritage of my people that were buried by the colonizers. So part of my journey as a woman of color leader has been to remember the strength and power and value that I have as a woman of color and as a Filipina, apart from the messages I receive in this white dominant culture that I'm somehow less than. So supporting women of color leaders is the work that I'm most passionate about. We as women of color regularly experience challenges to our leadership. We experience the pressure to perform and excel at the highest levels just to prove our competence and credibility and to earn a place at the table. We have to fight to have our voices heard, and we have to navigate systems that often devalue and diminish us. And despite all of the hurdles we face, we are resilient and we continue to be force mobilizers for social justice and social change. And we're powerful and transformational leaders. So today, I'm going to talk with you about women of color on the rise and what it takes to be a powerful and transformational woman of color leader. But before we start, I would like to begin by showing you an inspiring video of a spoken word piece by Naima Penniman. She's a Black woman of color spoken word poet. So I'm going to pull that up now and share that with you.
I am because we are. And who are we to each other? Beyond the great dividing, we are interwoven and arising, recognizing our survival depends on our deciding to cast aside the paradigms that build a hierarchy of lives. What do you see on the horizon? Are we in hiding? Are we thriving? Have we been guided through the night, made it to the other side? Labor pain feels like dying, pushing into a ring of fire, but something is yearning to be born and worth fighting for. We need to breathe deeper. The machine is crashing, the empire is collapsing. We need to breathe through the contractions of this excruciating passage. Our children have asthma. Our grandmas are gasping. We need to breathe deeper. There's a virus multiplying at the speed of light, the lungs of the world on fire, scorching the forest whose life work is to balance the atmosphere of our singular sacred earth. We need to breathe deeper. There's a knee on the neck of our precious reflection, lost to lack of breath. We need to breathe deeper. Feel the movement of air enter your nostrils. Sense your chest expanding, shape more space around the heart. Become buoyant, inflate your lungs, become quiet, hear the pulse of your own drum. Become thunder, become torrential rain, become lightning striking its yes into the atmosphere. There is a field out past limitation. I will meet you there. Let's get in formation. We have the dream. Let's build the foundation. Awoken, unveiled, no more mistaking. We are remembering. We are members of creation at the gate of transformation. Now we're entering. Times are shifting. What are you witnessing? Kiss the ground is whispering, come, fall to your knees, I need your listening. Hush the mind so you can hear the signs as they reveal themselves. Slow down, we are running out of time. And can you feel yourself? No distractions, face our shadows so we can heal ourselves. Complete the circle. We have all we need around us, between us, and inside of us. Survivalists, we got our light and compass guiding us, reminding us that despite the choking of tear gas and COVID, the West Coast still smoking, these prisons atrocious. So many dear elders, lonesome and homeless, so many broken, falling under hypnosis of supremacy, violence, and rampant psychosis, mass extraction, collapsing our air and our oceans, our coastlines corrosive, famine ferocious, shots aimed at our people, remote drone explosions. With this dismal prognosis, it's hard not to feel hopeless, but our hearts broken open. And we have the choice to stay frozen or focused. We need more than shame, remorse, and condolence. Failure is an option if we don't grow with this moment. We are not accident, each one of us chosen, each one of us holding a thread that needs to be woven back into the web to reanimate wholeness. What is the vision that's worth your devotion? Close your eyes. Can you see it? A divination as brilliant as our collective dreaming. The future will be the sum of all that we believed in and had the courage to achieve when there were no guarantees. We are descendants of a long line of freedom-seeking people who read the signs, communed with the unseen. We are carrying the torch, connected to the source, one drop of light in the darkest night, a beacon guiding us north. Don't shrink, time to soar. We know one thing's for sure. If we get this right, we will never return to a normal, a moral that no longer serves. No going back, justice yearns to be born. No one's gonna save us, my love, it's our turn. Let's birth the future our people in this earth deserve. Together we can do this. Let's be proud to be human in these inhumane times. Time to turn up the lumens, amp up your brightness. The tribes are uniting, multitudes multiplying, ancestors behind us. We dedicate our lives to a world conducive to life. We commit our breath to a destiny where all of us can breathe.
Oh. She's muted.
Thank you for letting me know I was muted. I was essentially saying that that video, even though I've seen it multiple times, is so inspiring and moving. It touches me every single time.
Yeah.
So what I would love to do now is I'd just like to hear a little bit from people who are in the room. And it would be great if you could introduce yourselves to me by name, pronouns, and some sort of reflection about the video. Was there anything in it that spoke to you personally?
Let's just start quickly. Genesis.
My name is Genesis. My pronouns are she, her. The video was very powerful. Just with the words and also the visuals, it really spoke to me. It was really great.
Thank you, Genesis.
Gabby, I use she, her pronouns. I like the way that it was like filmed because I feel like it focused more just on her and like what she was saying rather than just the background.
Great, thanks.
My name is Chantel. I use she, her pronouns. I like the way she just articulated her words and just how certain words kind of struck out to me. Like she said, we have a knee on our neck, or I don't remember the exact word she said, but it just really stuck out to me. And there were other words that were used that had a certain type of articulation with it that kind of like spoke out.
Great, thank you.
My name's Autumn. I use she, her pronouns. I really enjoyed her syntax that she chose. I think that it was really powerful way to bring the message out.
Great, thank you.
My name's Sky. I also use she, her pronouns. And I really like just the message of the video overall. Like you said, it was very powerful. And I feel like no one really connect to what she was saying and how she was.
Thank you.
I'm Maya. I use she, her pronouns, and I really liked the piece where the words that she was speaking sort of connected in with the music, sort of went at the same beat, and she started speaking a little louder, and it made it sound more like a rap than even a spoken poem. I thought that part was really powerful.
Great, thank you.
My name's Isabella. I use she, her pronouns, and I think Gabby said it, that I liked how the video was more focusing on her words rather than like the visuals. It made it more easy to pay attention to what she was saying.
Mhm. Thank you. Is that everybody in the classroom?
No, there are three more.
Okay, okay, great, great.
My name is Tess. I use she, her pronouns. I liked at the end of the video, just her words about the unification of people in general and like what a complicated time it is to be human beings and just to like come together.
Great.
I'm Victoria. I use she, her pronouns. In the beginning, she talked about like the contractions of like all the struggles in the world and like being a woman and being a woman of color. And I found that to be like really important because she didn't like refer it to like having children or like menstruating. She just like referred it to like an experience that like she has. So I thought that's important.
Thank you.
My name's Emma. I use she, her pronouns. I was in the bathroom for most of the video, but I really liked the ending part of it when she said something about like we need to take pride in being humane when the world is just like so inhumane, and that really meant a lot.
Great. Thank you. I also hear in the chat from Karen. She said, I love her message of each of us being a thread in a cloth that we are weaving together. That's Karen, she, her. Thank you, Karen. So it's great to be here with you and to hear from you. That was an incredibly powerful and moving piece. And I'm glad that it also had an impact on you as well. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so the title of today's presentation is Women of Color on the Rise. This is what we're going to be discussing today. First, I'm going to talk about the current status of women of color in leadership. Well, where are they represented or not represented? What are some of the obstacles to access to leadership? And then we're going to move on to talking about leadership redefined for women of color, right? There's the traditional definition of leadership, traditional characteristics of leadership. And what we're going to be talking about is a new way of thinking about leadership that is really informed by the values and characteristics and styles of women of color leaders. So women of color face a lot of obstacles to being able to step into our strength and our power. And we're also going to talk about, given the fact that the world at times can feel really oppressive and crushing as we're trying to advance and step into these roles, how is it that we stay the course? What are some of the things that help us to be resilient? And what are our ways of holding on to ourselves as a way of resistance? And then we're going to talk a little bit about, what is the impact of women of color leaders? Where we make a difference? How might we be making a difference? So this is what I'm calling touchstones, which are essentially a way of thinking about how to be together in community in the context of this presentation or class. So these are the things that I'm encouraging us to do with each other as a way of truly respecting and holding space for each other in a way that is really tuned in and coming from a place of openness. So of course, practice confidentiality. People share things within the course of this class. They're telling their own story. And so it's really their story to tell. So we encourage, we ask that you don't share anyone else's story. If you want to talk about your own, you want to talk about what you learned, that's great. And this is also an invitation to be fully present with each other, to be real, to be curious to what you're hearing and to what you'll be learning. Speak your truth in a way that respects other truths. If you see things differently, there is space and room to hold each one of those perspectives, or multiple perspectives is true. Both and, it's a similar concept, right? As far as accepting and respecting multiple truths and ways of seeing and being in the world. Focus on impact versus intent, which essentially means that if you say something that inadvertently hurts somebody else or offends somebody else, what's most important is for you to focus on how that impacted that person and attend to that. So listen to how they're feeling and why. That's the most important thing, rather than emphasizing your intent, because it could be a positive intent and it could still inadvertently cause some hurt or injury. And then this is a really big one. And these things, I'm going to encourage you not just to practice these within the context of this hour and a half time we have together, but these are actually practices that really help you to be in relationship and community throughout your life. So practice a spirit of inquiry, which means if you have assumptions, turn them into questions. If you find yourself being judgmental about something, catch yourself and turn that judgment into curiosity. If you're feeling defensive, turn that into self-reflection. Why is it that I might be feeling this way? What's coming up for me? And then you want to turn disagreement into shared exploration, right? So if you're thinking differently about something, how is it that we can learn from each other to understand a different way of experiencing? Allow silence. Oftentimes people need some time to integrate what they've heard. People need some time to formulate both thoughts and questions. So we'll give each other that, that grace. Discomfort oftentimes equals growth. It means you're grappling with something that's either new or something that might be distressing to hear. So trying to figure out how to hold that is a part of learning and growth. And then always I encourage people within my workshops and classes to be prepared to be changed and surprised by what we are discussing and what you're learning in the class. So let's just jump right in. The question is, what gets in the way of women of color leaders? We know that there are obstacles. We know that it's a challenge. So there are some frameworks for thinking about the obstacles and challenges on the path to leadership for women of color. So you all know the concept of the glass ceiling, right? There's also, so that's for women in generally, primarily white women, but for women of color, there's also what we're going to call a concrete ceiling, right? So it's impenetrable. You know, the glass you might be able to break through, but much harder to move through concrete or to break concrete. And then even before you get up to the ceiling, right, there's this phenomenon of a sticky floor for women of color, which means that you can't even start to climb the rung on the leadership to greater and greater positions of influence and power, because the forces that are pushing you down are so strong that you can't even leave the floor. So because of intersectional oppression, where women of color are having to deal with both racism and sexism, it's creating thicker barriers for women of color. And so that means that women of color really have to do a lot more, have to figure out how to navigate these systems, have to stay the course, need to be persistent. So the other thing that's important to know is that women of color, with women of color leadership, it's not a straight line, right? For men, maybe men of color, or, you know, some white women, it can be a more straight shot. For women of color, because of all of these challenges, it's described as a labyrinth, right? So you're having to go around obstacles that are in your path, and it may take longer, and you may need to be incredibly smart, strategic, and resourceful in order to get there. And then I mentioned that intersectional oppression. So there's the racism, the sexism, that there can also be challenges if you're somebody who's differently abled, you know, or around your social class, you know, language, all of those things also enter the mix. So we call that double, triple, quadruple jeopardy, depending on your intersectional identities. And then there's this issue of invisibility and visibility, right? So in some ways you're invisible because you're not being seen as valuable and credible. So sometimes you get pushed to the side, you might not be recognized. And then there's the visibility that comes from people scrutinizing you, right? You know, taking a look at the quality of your work, trying to evaluate you, but looking for ways in which you're not measuring up. So that is also a difficult challenge, you know, to be invisible and visible in ways that are difficult. And then the other thing that stops women of color from getting to these higher positions of power and influence is that, you know, there's an old boys network, right? And so men have doors open to them because of who they know. And if men are the ones who are the gatekeepers and they're in the positions of power and they're welcoming you through the door, you know, that's one of the ways that you might get advanced into these positions of leadership. But there's not a woman of color network, right? And there's not as many opportunities to be mentored and sponsored. When you say sponsorship, that means that somebody within an organization is not just helping you to learn and grow, but they're actively opening doors of opportunity for you. So they'll recommend you for a promotion. They'll introduce you to people who are influential so that they can help you to have greater opportunity. So these are all the things that get in the way, and these are the challenges that women of color leaders face. All right. So what we're going to talk a little bit more, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these issues. This information was taken from a report called Race to Lead. about women of color in the nonprofit sector, and it was part of their movement building movement project. The thing that is important to note here is that women of color actually want to be in leadership positions, right? So they want to be in leadership positions in a greater percentage compared to white women and white men. And men of color indicate that they're interested in being in positions of power at a slightly higher percentage. So that's important to note, is that even though women of color aren't getting into these roles, they want to be. And then because of the intersectional nature of the oppression, that means that women of color say that race has a negative impact on their careers, even more than men of color. And then at the same time, women of color say that gender has a negative impact on them as women of color, more so than white women. And women of color are oftentimes passed over for promotions and projects in favor of white women, white men, and men of color. So even if those people don't have the same level of credentials or experience, those people are still advancing over women of color. And women of color just aren't seen as leaders. So their leadership is not cultivated because of the bias against women of color. Does anybody have any questions about this information? You're going to have to call it out because I can't see you. I just see the screen. Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to continue on then. So here's another really interesting and important piece of data and information, right? So if you look at this, it has the different higher ed degrees that people can attain, and they have it broken down by race and gender. So the blue is women of color. And as you can see, women of color are right in line with men of color, white women, and white men with regards to bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. And when it comes to advanced degrees like PhDs, JDs, MDs, they're right up there along with the white men, right? So so they have education. We're talking about the credentials, right? So these credentials should open up doors of opportunity if you have a lot of education. What we're discovering is that, and what we've known is that that's not sufficient to help women of color attain these positions or receive compensation for advancement. And people, women of color who had master's degrees, they were the most likely to be frontline and administrative staff. So they were highly overqualified for the positions that they were in, and least likely to be in senior management. And the issue of adequate and fair compensation was an issue for women of color doing the same job. And even if they had more qualifications than other people doing a similar job, they still got paid less. I know this is all pretty depressing, but we will have an opportunity to discuss it in a moment. So here's another graph, and in this one, it's essentially showing you the corporate ladder and the different positions from entry level to the highest level of leadership within an organization. And then they've also, they're showing you based on race and gender, what happens with regards to moving up to leadership positions. Where are people represented? So if you see at the entry level, right, white women and white men are where you would expect them to be at 30 and 35%. And women of color and men of color are are even, right? Equal at 17%. But look at what happens as you go higher and higher up in the leadership structure. So managers, right? So there's a loss for women of color there. As you can see, white men are represented in greater and greater degrees. As you go up this leadership ladder, white women have some losses, but look at women of color. You're going from 17% to 4% of the highest level of C-suite leadership. So as you go up the ladder, it's becoming more male and more white. Here's one of the impacts of everything that I've been describing to you, right? So women of color, women and women of color are tired. All of these barriers, all of these challenges, it starts wearing on you. If you're constantly getting the message that you don't measure up, that you're not good enough, smart enough, capable, it starts affecting you in a way that makes you feel chronically stressed, exhausted, and burnt out. And you can see that women in general are experiencing this to a much greater extent than men. All right, so I'm gonna stop the share. And then I just would like to hear from you about what it was like to see and hear that information about the status of women of color in leadership.
I'm just curious where the like those statistics specifically came from.
Yeah, there are a couple of reports. Let me just go back here. That were conducted for women of color in leadership. So this one was McKinsey and Company, and they do a lot of research on nonprofit leadership. This one was Women of Color in the Nonprofit Sector by BMP Building Movement Project. So, and then Race to Lead, which is another research project that was done also by the Building Movement Project. So great question, and really important to know where this information is coming from and what perspective the researchers have on the issue.
Yeah, thank
Other
you.
questions? Sure.
I have a comment on the question.
Yes, sure, great.
I think that the two statistics that were most off-putting were the fact that women of color had the same amount of PhDs as white men, and yet the statistic where it showed how like the genders and races changed as it went from like beginning jobs to high up, it got so much less while men just continued rising.
Yeah, it's very upsetting, to see that level of inequity and unfairness. So yes, thank you for lifting that up. Other reactions?
I had a comment as well. I found it eye-opening to see the last statistics about like women like burning out and like being exhausted and like feeling like probably like mental and physical like effects of that, because I think like as women, like sometimes we all get tired and like there's certain like things that like we all experience in our lives, but it's different to see that like all other women are also experiencing this too at like different degrees. So I thought that was important.
Yeah, absolutely. We as women, we have a lot on our shoulders. We're caring for so many people, right? We're caring for family. We are doing heavy lifting in our work and in our community. And yeah, we are pretty tired. So yes, thank you for that acknowledgement.
I really, I never heard of the concept of the concrete ceiling or the sticky floors. And I think that's because I feel like with the glass ceiling, we know of it, we learn about it. And it's like, you can't reach that barrier, but you can look at it.
Right.
Like the concrete ceiling, it's so like, it's there, but we don't know what's on the other side and we don't know how to attain the other side. And I think myself as a woman of color, I think it's so interesting because like I reflect back on my life and like the future. And to me, I think it's not, I don't think me receiving a PhD is attainable for me or tangible for me. But it clearly is in statistics of like women of color being able to come to these degrees, and they're very aligned with white men. So it's just that concrete ceiling, we can't look at it because it's almost like we're not supposed to, but obviously we do.
Yes,
Get there.
yes.
It's a long road, but I just think that concept is so interesting. I've never heard of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a long road, and you're right, you can't see what's on the other side of it. And it's made to keep you out, right? If somebody that's concrete, then it's definitely a pretty significant barrier. So yes, and I think that those metaphors are really powerful when it comes to describing what it's like for women of color leaders. So yeah, so thank you. Any other reflections, comments? That was a lot of information and very powerful information, and unfortunately, very demoralizing information. So, and we're gonna shift, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about how women of color are resilient, how women of color are able to continue despite all of these challenges that I just outlined to you in these earlier slides. But any last questions or comments about that information?
Well, as teacher of the class, it's so fascinating to me, the process that teaching this as a subject, but at the same time, it's clearly crossing my whole identity, obviously as woman of color, but with all the information, but also with the things that you say, how we face the visibility, invisibility. It's like, like I teach about these topics, but the invisibility is like in the moment that white faculty, obviously male or female, teaches the same, but and so it's presented that, wow, oh my God. And so I know why, but it is amazing that it's like, oh, and so what I teach is not colonialism. And so since 2 days ago, there is a sentence that is stuck with me because I saw announced by a female white faculty that she said, "It's so interesting in my scholarship that I am studying the impact of the Spanish colony in New Mexico in Native Americans." And for me, it was like, wow, somebody's discovering that. But the point is that now that will exist as class. And it's like, oh, because I teach Latina feminism does not feel like it has an impact. But and so that, but it is part of this concrete ceiling, like, because I enter in the cycle, like, I'm not doing enough, I don't teach enough, I don't present enough. It's like, no, I do. The thing is that I'm not white faculty. Right. But it is, I mentioned that because it's a way of living, navigating this. Or they're like, oh, I know why, then I should not be sad. But it's like, oh no, I'm sad. And it's like at the same time, I am a scholar or teacher or whatever in this, right? So I don't know. And it is fascinating. And Amihan, I say that what you do is very important because as woman of color coming to the United States, I went to many trainings about women of color. And I confess that I was all the time like, that will not happen to me. That will not happen to me. Until teaching in Kent State College, probably this was, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. The first time that I was approached by a Latina background student. Her name is Jasmitila. And so she came to my office and she came and she said, I'm coming just to tell you that this is the first time that I see a Latina with a doctoral degree.
Oh, wow.
And so you see, it was not about me, but for me, all these ideas that I had, oh, that will not happen to me, is like, what? And it's like, wow. And I don't know, just Chantel is saying right now again, like how I see myself doing a doctorate. And
Yep.
it's like, oh, and so I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's so important that we still modeling
Yes.
about our resilience and power.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's this, sense of incredulousness that people of color, women of color can attain this level of credentials and education. So that is something that is really invalidating, right? In a way.
So I see 6 chats.
Oh, yes. Let's read those.
Sorry.
Let's take a look at these. All right. So let's see. Okay, that was in, let's see who this is. That grew Victoria. It was helpful to see that some of the issues that we're facing are global. I wonder if there are enthusiasts out there that are a little bit more inclusive of gender diversity. Sorry, I'm doing talk to text in statistics. Okay, it's not enthusiasts, it's statistics. One of the issues that we are facing, global, wonder if there are statistics out there that are a bit more inclusive of gender diversity. Yes. It's a great comment. Are you seeing any other, Patricia, are you seeing any others in there? Those are the ones that I'm catching.
No, I just see the number 6.
Okay. Okay.
That.
So the other thing that I wanted to say in reference to what Professor Patricia just shared, right, is it's not about an individual's abilities or capabilities or intelligence or education or credentials, right? Because it's a system. It's a system of white supremacy. It's a system of systemic racism, which means that there's a structure set in place that is formed and informed by this bias that makes it really hard for us to gain access and to advance in those ways. So, individual people have this experience, but it is a phenomenon that goes across the board in every sector. There are these challenges to BIPOC leadership and women of color leadership. Okay, I'm going to bring us back to the PowerPoint unless there's any last questions or comments. Okay, so let's continue here. So I'm going to read this quote by Alice Walker. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And this is a really profound quote because there are external barriers to our stepping into our power and our leadership. And then there are internal beliefs that also hold us back. And if we don't believe that we have power, and we may be defining our power in different ways, or we might need to recognize that we have power in certain areas. If we don't think we have it, then we don't have it. All right, so I would love to hear from you because we're talking about leadership. I would love to hear from you about what the common definition or characteristics of leadership are. You can call them out because I can't. I'm going to just stop the share actually and let you call out. So what are traditional definitions or characteristics of leadership that we've learned in our society?
Confidence,
Yep, confidence. Yep, great. What else?
strength,
Strength.
Professionalism.
Yep. Can you say a little bit more about what professionalism looks like or means?
There's just like, it's terms of like old school ways, like you're supposed to look a certain way in the workplace, you're supposed to dress a certain way, and you're supposed to
Yep.
talk a certain way. And not that that's right or wrong, but that's like a thing.
Yeah, definitely, right? There's a particular way that you're supposed to talk, dress, look, that gives you access. And if you fall outside of that, then you're not taking it seriously. So yes, great. When you think of leader, who comes up in your mind? What is their gender?
Yeah.
Male. Yeah, traditionally male, right? What else is a traditional form of leadership?
White, like a white man, usually like our president, except once
Yep.
has been white, like.
Yep. White male, absolutely. What other characteristics?
Taking initiative.
Taking initiative, right? Go-getter, take initiative, taking action. Yep, that's it. So I'm going to bring this PowerPoint back up and so this is it, right? It's also hierarchical, top down. It's command and control. It's mostly authoritarian. People are giving directives. People are telling others what to do. It's competitive, right? Like you gotta be competitive. You can't be soft. I think a number of you said strong, right? The traditional perception of a good leader, someone who's strong, maybe even to the point of aggressive, right? So really pushing to make things happen, not sitting back, task focused and oriented. So this is where I'd like to expand the conversation. And I want us to redefine leadership, right? Because in reality, we're all leaders and we are what I mean by that is that we all have the ability in whatever sphere we're in to influence change. So that is true. And I want to talk about women's form of leadership because it stands in contrast to male, the traditional male, white male model of leadership. So I also just want to say that these are some generalizations because not all male leaders have those attributes or characteristics or lead in that way. And the same is true for women. Women may adopt a more traditional approach to leadership, oftentimes because that's the way you can be successful, right? Is if you become a leader in the way that men are leaders. What I'm going to propose is that there's another form of leadership that is powerful. And I would even say more powerful than that other traditional form of leadership. And that's a form of leadership that's relationship focused. And for women, because we've been socialized to be relational, and men can be socialized as well, but typically women are socialized to a greater degree to be relationship focused. And then if we're people of color, we oftentimes come from cultures that are collectivist, right? So we are always thinking of ourselves in relationship to other people, our families, our community. And so there were a number of academics and activists who coined this term second space. And essentially what that means is that it is leaders who actually don't think about just their own power, right? And actually work to build community power. So it's not just lifting up yourself so you can get recognized, so you have this power and influence, but it's asking, how can we lift up the whole community along with ourselves? So we're talking about on the individual level, the organizational, and the community-wide level. So we're going to transform our society by lifting up everybody's power instead of just your own personal power. And that's a really different way of thinking about leadership. And then there's this quote on the slide that I love. It's one of my favorite quotes by Yolo Akili, who's this African-American poet and writer. And he says, oppression thrives off isolation. Connection is the only thing that can save us, right? So power through connection and community. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what does the shared collective leadership look like. So it's not a fixed, rigid structure. It's dynamic, it's interactive. So different people influence what happens. Everybody, though, is working together to achieve the same goals. And the other thing about shared and collective leadership, you know, when I talked about the traditional form of leadership, it's top down and hierarchical. When you have shared leadership structures, it can be lateral, right? So peer to peer. It's not just up down, it's also lateral, and it can also be upward, right? So I don't know, people may have had the experience of you know, supervising up, right? Or influencing up. So it's a lot more fluid in that way. So the participation of everybody is what's prioritized and important. It's self-organizing, which means that you're not necessarily going, like I said, by these rigid rules or this rigid structure, but you're listening to people and you're trying to figure out, okay, what do people need? What are their strengths? How can we come together and make something happen? So the group is what decides what the structure is and how to organize. And the other piece here, because when we're talking about shared collective leadership, we're talking about community leadership, is that you have to create a culture of trust, right? There has to be a culture of trust if you're going to be working together in this way. So in order for this form of leadership to be effective, you got to do a lot of foundation building and trust building and making sure that you are honest and transparent and authentic with each other so that you can work together in a more powerful and effective way. So I'm just going to stop. You know, actually, I'm going to move through a few more slides and then we'll talk to have a conversation. So given everything that we talked about earlier, right? It seems so demoralizing when you're talking about that concrete ceiling, the sticky floor. I gave you all those statistics about the ways in which women of color aren't represented in leadership situations and roles. I was able to show you that despite credentials and education, that didn't open up doors of opportunity. So what do you do? So that feels pretty crushing, and it feels really demoralizing and depressing if you're a woman of color who's trying to make a difference in the world and who wants to occupy these positions of influence. So these are some of the things. So you have to, in order to get through this, you have to build resilience, because it can really keep you down and it can feel crushing. So what are some of the ways that you build your resilience? So what I'm proposing is that one of the ways to do that, and I'm going to call it radical, is radical joy and radical self-care. This is revolutionary. It is something that's necessary in order for you to endure and navigate all of those challenges I mentioned earlier. And in fact, what happens when you're feeling the oppression, the crushing weight and oppression of racism and sexism and other forms of intersectional oppression, right? It takes your joy away. It takes your joy away. So what a revolutionary act if you can get to a place where in the moment you can still experience joy, right? The joy of living, the joy of experiencing the world, because then these forces aren't taking that away from you. So there are some external forces we can't always change or that are hard to change and shift, but your internal experience of joy and you're deciding that even though the world is not valuing me, I'm going to value myself. I'm going to take care of myself, right? I'm going to prioritize myself. That is a pushing back of the oppression. It's a pushing back of all of these forces that are trying to define you and are trying to tell you that you don't matter. That physical act of taking care of yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually is a radical act that's pushing against that. Because you are saying, I matter, I have value. I don't care what you're saying, but I matter and I have value. The other thing that we talked about, so the women's ways of leading are often very relational. They focus on connection, and that is something that can bolster your spirit. It's something that can feed you, heal you. If you're in a situation where people can reflect back to you the brilliance of who you are and your intelligence and your power, then you can start to internalize some of that, and you can start to not feel so alone, because this oppression, it isolates us and it makes us feel like we are handling and dealing with this burden and challenges on our own. And the reality is that we're not, but we need to be with other people who are also experiencing something similar, and you're in community so that you can be heard, understood, and then regroup and try to figure out, okay, how could I get replenished so I can go back out there and keep working on navigating these systems so that I can make a difference. And then we're going to talk about community cultural capital. Oftentimes, when the focus is on people of color, on BIPOC, on BIWOC, women of color, we are spoken about from this deficit perspective, right? Like all of the things that are hard or all of the conditions that we face, and and all of the ways in which we're not able to have capacity to do whatever, right? And so the other way of being resilient to all of this is realizing that there are a lot of assets that we have as communities of color, as women of color. So we're calling that community cultural capital. So this is a concept that was developed by Dr. Tara Yoso. And what she calls cultural capital is, the knowledge, skills, abilities, the connections you have as people in communities of color, all of that knowledge, right, that helps you to survive and resist racism and other forms of oppression. So this history of resistance and this history of survival, it has been happening all the way along. So it's tapping into that. So the resistance capital, right? So those are the skills that BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color acquire through the process of challenging, questioning, hopefully working on dismantling these structures that are inequitable and oppressive. So there's a level of skill and resilience that you develop as you are resisting these forces that are pushing you down. And then navigational capital, right? So Professor Patricia talked about always having to navigate, right? So you get strategic and you get wise and thoughtful about that. How do you survive in these white-led, white supremacy organizations? So here is a diagram of the types of community cultural capital And I want you to look at this and take this in, because these aren't things that we always think of necessarily as part of our capital or our assets, or strengths that we have access to. So there's the aspirational capital, that's holding on to your hopes and your dreams in the face of all those barriers, right? So you're not going to give up. You're going to persist because you're going to continue to hope that you can reach your goals and your dreams. Familial capital, right? In our communities, family is so important. And we oftentimes have our nuclear family, but really family means extended family and can also include chosen family. And those are the people that lift us up and have our back. And then you also have networks within your community, right? So there's other sources of support and that are there in the wider community beyond your family. We talked about the navigational and resistant capital. There's also linguistic capital. So if you speak more than one language, that means you can be a bridge. That means that you have these skills that are important and relevant in our increasingly diverse and multicultural world. So these are the things that are assets that we have access to in our communities of color. And then this is an important question. So I'm going to give you an opportunity in a moment to respond. So I want to hear from you about how is joy an act of resistance? And I invite you to comment on or ask questions about any of the previous material that I just shared. It was a lot. So I'd love to hear from you.
A lot of joy here.
I can start.
Yes.
So joy is an act of resistance because in a way, a lot of the oppression that women of color and women in general, I guess, face is a way to kind of take your joy away from you. Oppression really is just that in a general sense. And so by continuing to feel that joy, even while facing oppression, you're resisting against what they're attempting to do to you.
That's right. That's right. You're pushing back against it. Yeah. And it's a way of holding on to, yourself and your birthright, right? Which is to experience joy.
I think it's important for women to keep joy and to challenge that, because when women have joy, they can be with other women who have joy, and that forms bonds and keeps the women of color community strong and women in general strong, bonded together.
That's right. That's right. Can't think of anything more powerful than a group of women of color who are coming together and joined in that joy, right? That's a pretty powerful thing. And it's a very life affirming thing.
I think even just with myself, sometimes, I go through those situations and I decide to take it with joy. And even when I go back to my room by myself, I'm like, I did that. It just even feels good, you doing it yourself and also sharing that with other people. It just goes both ways, which is really
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something to feel good about because you were able to approach whatever the situation was, and you were able to choose how you were going to be within the midst of that circumstance. So really powerful thing. And what about this concept of the form of leadership that I presented to you as a counterweight or other way of stepping into leadership, the shared collectivist form of leadership? What do you think about that?
I feel like that's kind of how women's and gender studies classes are run, which is much different from our other courses, in my opinion. And my grades reflect that that's a better way for it to be done. So like, I would
Mhm.
believe that that is true.
Absolutely. It's more inclusive, it's more connected. It's really supporting everyone instead of this competitive, I'm in it for me. It's a really different orientation. What about radical joy and radical self-care? Yes, please.
Not something on radical self-care, but I'm actually reading a book called The Body's Not an Apology, like the power of radical self-love. And so I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it goes in hand with radical self-care because
Absolutely.
yeah, so when you radically self-love yourself, it kind of takes away everything else that other people think of you.
Yeah, because you're defining yourself, right? You are loving and valuing and honoring yourself. And if you're able to do that for yourself, then other people's perceptions of who you are, other people trying to define your value, it's not as important because you know who you are, because you love and respect and are caring for yourself. Thank you. That's a great comment. All right, so I'm going to move us along unless there are any last minute comments or questions. Okay, this is a quote by June Jordan. I'm a feminist, and what that means to me is much the same as the meaning of the fact that I'm Black. It means that I must undertake to love myself and to respect myself as though my very life depends upon self-love and self-respect, right? And that was something that you had commented on just before. Audre Lorde, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare, right? Because it's saying again and again that I matter, I matter. Stepping into our power, there is no force more powerful than a woman determined to rise, right? Power is not going to be given to us. It's not going to be given to us. We have to take it. We have to step into it. We got to figure out how to navigate these systems so that we can participate, or form our own structures and systems and communities where our particular form of leadership and power is fully recognized and valued. I'm going to show you another video. Here we go. That's right, the women are coming. So I wanted to hear some of your reactions to that video. It's another really powerful one. How did it make you feel? Yes.
Well, I think it's also interesting because the amount of times or like the amount of counter arguments I've heard that like, oh, if a woman was president, she would get her period and start a war in 2 seconds. And it just seems so dull to say because I think that a lot of people aren't aware of how many women are in high positions of
That's
governmental
right.
power.
That's
So
right.
it's just, and it's probably because we don't hear about them on CNN consistently because these women aren't starting wars or aren't pressing that big red button.
That's right.
Crazy.
That's an excellent point. They're not in the news because they're doing such a great job of leading their countries, right?
Yes, this is my candidate for King State College presidency.
Right.
I'll take it.
Yes.
I think this video is like, you know, really positive, but it does make me think like we've never seen a woman president in America before
That's
ever.
right.
And like as like the world power, like whatever people want to call America, like that still hasn't happened yet. And we're seeing plenty of women and women of color be presidents in other countries.
Yep. That says something, right? Where all of these other countries have been able to allow women of color to rise to the most powerful position in the country, and we haven't done that yet. So it's really speaking to the level of gender bias that we have in this country.
It also speaks to this wrong narrative of American excellence. Like I think that a lot of people in America believe that we are #1 and we are the best country in the world.
Yep.
And that there's just that negative narrative of American excellence. And I think that it's not a bad thing to step back and acknowledge that your country isn't progressing in a positive way.
Absolutely. I think that you're right. If we had the wisdom to step back and really reevaluate, you know, maybe there would be different opportunities and choices. Others?
I don't know. I'm just most noticed the time that it is 2:20, Amihan.
Oh, yes.
You are in charge of the time, but just, you know.
Yes. Thank you for the time check. So I just want to quickly, you know, since we were talking about the leaders of the prime ministers and the presidents of other countries, I just wanted to show you a few slides about where we stand with women of color in political leadership positions. So we know about Kamala Harris, right? First woman and woman of color vice president of Indian and Black descent. AOC, youngest woman elected to Congress. Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts, first Black woman to represent Massachusetts in Congress. Sharice Davis and Deb Haaland, first Native American Congresswoman, and Deb Haaland is now the Secretary of the Interior, which is the highest level of political leadership that an Indigenous person has ever been in. And then Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, first Muslim women elected to Congress. And then we've got the Black Lives Matter women, Alicia Garcia, Patricia Cullors, and Opal Tometi, who have created this really powerful movement to address anti-Blackness in our culture. So let me just do this. This does not want to cooperate with me, but we'll find the slide. Okay, here we go. All right, so you know, we just have a few more moments left of in our time together. So I wanted to give us an opportunity to talk about, you know, what are your takeaways from the presentation And what are your hopes and ideas for change? We've talked a lot about some of the barriers and the obstacles. What are your ideas for how to create a world in which women and women of color are valued and have access to these positions of power and influence? So I'm going to stop this. So takeaways and ideas and hopes for change. And any questions, you're also welcome to ask questions of me. I welcome that as well.
My biggest takeaway was when you talked about how we can expand like women of power with our own power too. So like, I think that's important that like if we get in a position of power to like uplift other women.
Yes.
And not like a competition, but to like
Yes.
help the whole community of women.
Absolutely. Yes. Great. Thanks.
Something that I took away was I was thinking about just the glass ceiling aspect of it and how like a lot of people in society don't even believe that there is a glass ceiling. So that it's extremely difficult not only to get through this metaphor of a concrete ceiling, but it's also difficult to societally get people to understand that there is one.
Yes. Great point. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Mine kind of goes off of that because I was going to say that my idea for change is for people to listen more. I think that there's a big lack of listening and a lot of talking. And I think especially from white women, being one myself, I think that a lot of the time we tend to inject our own voices into the conversation instead of sitting back for a second and listening to what women of color are asking us to do. So that would be my biggest idea for change.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you.
I really enjoyed the glass ceiling and the sticky floor metaphor. I'm very much a visual thinker, so that really kind of like helps solidify things for me.
Great, thank you.
I think my biggest takeaway from everything is I kind of like how you started with like the statistics and how like the concrete ceiling, the sticky floor, and these struggles that women of color go through, but then closing with like women of color are in these positions. Granted, it's not a lot, but we are on the move. Like even the last 10 years, we've had so much progress. And who's been in office, who's making these step forwards and the changes that are gonna happen. And I think like, even if like, I've seen that video, like I think 3 times, I'm not really sure. And every time it's just like, it's like a sense of hope like hope coming towards the future.
Absolutely.
And, it's a slow moving progress, but it's going. And I think that's the thing that matters the most is it's moving forward.
Absolutely. Incremental, small changes, but it's happening. Absolutely. Anybody else? Also, the folks that are logged into Zoom, feel free to type in the chat your takeaway. And even if you're, I was going to say you're not on your computers in the classroom. So I was going to encourage people to type in the chat, even if they didn't want to speak aloud. But any questions you have before we end? We have a few minutes left, a couple of minutes left. Okay, well,
Well,
thank you so much for inviting me to your class. Thank you for fully participating and engaging in this information and with each other and having, I really appreciate the rich comments and conversations we've had. So it's been a pleasure.
pleasure. Thank you, Ami. Everybody on virtual Zoom presence. Thank you for our office with Mark and Misty. Thank you so much. So much appreciated your technical support with us. And Amihan, we're still in touch and hopefully we will continue collaborating. From Brendan, Dana, thank you so much for this opportunity to listen and learn. Now, thank you for you to be here. Great. I cannot. Oh,
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
great. Thank you so much. So we're in touch, Amihan.
Okay, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.